Hello and a very warm welcome to the program. I am Imonia Marire. It has been 65 years since Nigeria gained independence, and one story has defined the nation's journey more than any other: oil and gas. From that first discovery in Oloibiri in 1956 to becoming Africa's largest crude producer, oil has powered the Nigerian economy. It shaped its politics and influenced its destiny. But it is a story of promise and paradox. Oil brought wealth, yet it also deepened dependency. It has built cities and funded governments, but left oil-producing communities poorer and polluted. Over the years, we have seen landmark reforms: Nigeria joining OPEC in 1971, the creation of the NNPC in 1977, and more recently, the Petroleum Industry Act of 2021, designed to make this sector more transparent and efficient. Still, the big question remains: why has oil wealth not translated into national prosperity? Why are host communities still crying for justice? And as the world moves towards cleaner energy, what is next for Nigeria's oil-dependent economy? At 65, Nigeria stands at a crucial crossroad. Can it finally turn its oil riches into redevelopment, or will it remain trapped in the paradox of plenty on 65 years on as a nation? Well, on this edition of the program, we take a deep look at Nigeria's oil and gas story at 65: promise, power, and the price of prosperity. These are the issues that we'll be dealing with on the program this edition. And I'm joined virtually by, for now, 3 experts in the field. First, I'm joined by Mr. Godswill Nwankwo. Mr. Nwankwo is a seasoned oil and gas advisor with over 2 decades of leadership and operational experience spanning the oil and gas sector, finance, and technology sectors. Mr. Godswill Nwankwo, thank you so much for finding time to join us.
Thanks for having me, Moni. Appreciate it.
Great. We're also joined by Mr. Maurice Alagua. Mr. Alagua is an oil and gas expert and is joining us from Yenagoa, the Bayelsa State capital. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Alagua.
Thank you so very much. I'm pleased to be here.
Great to have you on. We're also joined all the way from Warri in Delta State by Comrade Igbini Odafe Emmanuel. Comrade Odafe is a petroleum engineer and a trade unionist in that sector for very many years. Thank you so much, Mr. Comrade Igbini Odafe, for joining us.
Very much for having me.
Great. It's good to have you. We also hope that we will be joined by Mr. Chinedu Ukadike, who is the Publicity Secretary of the Independent Petroleum Marketers Association of Nigeria, IPMAN, in the course of the program. Gentlemen, so let's go straight on to our discussion. Nigeria is 65, and we're looking at the oil and gas sector. How much has that sector impacted Nigeria, the Nigerian people, and the Nigerian economy in the past 65 years? Let's begin with Mr. Nwankwo.
Thank you for having me, Imoni. I'm actually glad to be here. The problem with our oil and gas sector, it has experienced an extended period of the mafia-style manipulation. When you talk about the oil and gas sector, it's the core essence of our Nigerian economy, and we're supposed to have democratized this sector a long time ago. The process of obtaining license in this industry has been so opaque. When you're trying to attract investment, we're trying to democratize a process where participants, private participants, can pool resources together and be able to invest in this sector. Then you have to make sure that the licensing process is not as opaque as it is. Take, for example, in functional democracy, like, for example, the United States, they have a licensing process. If you want to get a permit to drill, all you have to do is you deal with the regulatory body in the states at the state level to get the license, deal with the individual asset owners or the property owners. By the time you get into an agreement with that, then you can now apply for a permit, and the state gives you the permit to drill just so that they can keep track of the downhole and the subsurface parts and holes that you're drilling. But with Nigeria, where you have to go all the way to Abuja, pay hundreds of millions of naira just to be able to get a license to drill on an asset that you're not even sure that has some probability of future cash flow, then that becomes really, really complicated. And knowing that we have an opportunity as one of the 6 largest oil producing country in the world, we have to democratize this industry and allow private participants to reduce the barrier of entry so that private participants can actually get in and actually fund and power this particular industrial sector. As long as we don't do that, as long as we have this opaque process, you have trapped opportunities you cannot unbundle as much as possible. And I'd like to make a comment with this situation that's going on with the refinery. Look, you cannot prevent workers from unionizing. I know people have made case that this is a private company, it's not a government entity, but that is not the case. If you look at the oil and gas, big oil and gas majors in Nigeria, including the Shell, the Exxon, the Chevron, they have unions. They have the they have the Nubank. So what it makes Dangote different? I know you can say that it's a local industry or it's a domestic owner, but that is not the case because you have a situation where unions are there to protect workers and to protect the industry that they work. Because without the unions, you're not going to have. I work in oil and gas, and I've been there for decades. Without unions, you wouldn't have workers that are wearing safety glasses on the rig site. Without unions, you wouldn't have workers that are wearing hard hat because the industry CEOs will want to cut costs. So you have to let unions, unionize so that they can be able to protect their workers, negotiate for better pay, allow the workplace for women that be able to work and work in the safe spaces. So this whole restriction on trying to have unions being part of the workforce, that is not something that will go well for the oil and gas industry.
All right, we'll come back to that, Mr. Nwankwo. But Comrade Igbini, let me bring you in at this point in time. Over the years, we have heard people say that Nigeria's oil has become both a blessing and a burden, both a blessing and a curse since independence in 1960. How did that happen?
Well, thank you very much. Incidentally, I am an insider. I work in the heart of the petroleum sector with Total Energy, E&P. So I've worked onshore, offshore, swamp, and in the production. You see, I will keep repeating myself. God bless this great country with this critical resource that made it possible for the Allied forces to win the Second World War. It was because of the oil resource that was lacking in Germany. That was why Hitler lost that Second World War. That is to tell us how critical crude oil is in global politics and war. Now, we often focus only on the economic aspect of it. But let us even look at that. What has happened since Oloibiri? Somebody described the situation as a story of opportunities lost, administrative disorganization, and resource mismanagement. I will keep repeating myself, as I've done for more than 30 years, which cost me my job, that this great country will either be great or be destroyed, depending on how we manage or continue to mismanage this critical oil sector. Now, we started very well, let me tell you. I don't know whether we have taken pain to study the 1969 Petroleum Act. That was when Nigeria made a statement that we want to be in firm control of this God-given resource, which is so critical. We took possession from the then Shell, and then we decided to move further by joining other member countries of OPEC with a shared dream to own, control, and manage the oil resource of their country for the good of their country. We decided to what? Nigerianize the Nigerian petroleum sector. And that was what led to the establishment of NNOC, which we now call NNPC. Beautiful move. And that is why countries like the Saudi Arabia, the UAE, the Libya, the Iraq, Iran, and the rest of them became what they became in terms of positive progress. But what has happened to us? In fact, I weep every day each time I try to read what they celebrated on August 2021 as a landmark achievement by the then leadership of President Muhammadu Buhari. And they call it the PIA. Let me keep repeating myself, and I challenge anybody. I repeat, I challenge anybody to a public debate anywhere in the world. My position remains that this PIA is the worst enemy of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. The worst. And as long as this PIA is allowed to exist the way it is now, this country will never progress. Tell me how. With due respect to members of the National Assembly, they sat down and said, look, this oil resource belonging to the Federal Republic of Nigeria should be handed over to a so-called company they created from nowhere and called it NNPCL. That our collective wealth should be handed over to that so-called company, managed by people they also handpicked and kept there. What is even more annoying, haven't transferred the ownership of our oil resource to their so-called NNPCL, their, not ours. They now said, okay, 20% of the profit you make, keep it to yourself. Use it as operational cost. In addition, the profit oil, the gas oil, profit gas, take 30% for what they call Nigeria fee, and then for exploring frontier basins. How do you run a country like this? I've been weeping, and I said it, and I'll continue to repeat. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's renewed hope agenda is dead on arrival as long as this PIA remains. How can he fund the renewed hope agenda?
So let's turn our attention to the IPMAN National Publicity Secretary, Mr. Chinedu Ukadike. Thank you for joining us. And I ask you that question. How much has our ownership and control of our resources, oil and gas resources, benefited the Nigerian state and the Nigerian people in 65 years of independence?
I have to take this in primarily the introduction and proponent of independent marketers in Nigeria. If you are not independent, that the issue of distribution of petroleum products in Nigeria was solely done by the IOCs. And this warranted them to build their filling stations more along the cities of this country at the very strategic places. They also refine, they also sell our crude, at the same time also do the retail. So we actually have the Shell BP, the Mobil, the Sun Oil, the Unipetrol, and all the rest of them. And you also find out that the people travel close to 200 kilometers 10 kilometers to be able to access petroleum products from the hinterland to the cities. This is where these IOCs concentrated, including their filling stations. There were no filling stations in the hinterland. It is very, very difficult for people to get to purpose kerosene in the village, except in the toughest times. They are not also not being nuclearized. So when Obasanjo provided the independent marketer, also seeing the monopolistic nature of these IOCs, and also not establishing their principles in the hinterland, independent marketers was formed in 1983 by the Act of the Parliament. And since then, we're from just a very humble beginning. I want also to tell you today that we have 80% distribution outlets across the country. What are the benefits of the prominence of independent marketers in Nigeria prior to our independence? One, it has also ensured competition and the decentralization of retail outlets and filling stations across the country. It is very, very pertinent at this time that I should mention that there is no more than 2 kilometers in any part of this country where you will not see the presence of the independent marketer. Even in the waterways, you will have filling stations in the waterways. We have ensured that some of these filling stations are being established in the hinterland to be able to allow the rural people to enjoy the benefits of the oil producing nature of Nigeria. You can also agree with me that the coming of independent marketers has also disadvantaged the monopolization of the IOCs, thereby triggering of competition among the retail outlet owners in Nigeria. So independent marketers have done wonderfully well to be able to bring succor to Nigerians, and not only that, bring employment. We are at least from 1 to 5. You can't independent marketers at the top. Apart from government institutions, they have been able to bring employment into this country, and we also try as much as possible to put petroleum products across the nation.
All right, Mr. Nwankwo, let's bring you in. Comrade Igbini raised the issue of ownership, control, and ultimately the management of oil resources and revenues in Nigeria from 1960 until now. And many Nigerians and indeed non-Nigerians think that perhaps with the kind of resources at our disposal, with the kind of oil wealth that Nigeria has, both in terms of crude and gas, that we ought not to be where we are today. And that those resources and those revenues ought to have taken us to a much better place than where we are today. Now, so how exactly has the management of these resources and revenues impacted governance in Nigeria in the last 65 years? Mr. Nwankwo.
Well, the problem with our industry, with the oil and gas industry in Nigeria, is that we are bereft of good ideas and good best practices that you see in all parts of the oil and gas community, in the global oil and gas community. We know that we are losing a huge amount of crude oil due to theft and pipe vandalism. We have seen reports, the last couple of years where, barrels and barrels, thousands of barrels of crude oil just disappears. They have vessels that come in, take up oil, and steal the crude oil and evacuate. And you're talking about Nigeria's territorial waters that is supposed to be protected by our naval officers, Nigerian Navy. How can they be there when ships, vessels, foreign vessels are getting into our territory, evacuating our crude oil resources, assets, and without anybody, paying attention or anybody trying to stop them? That is the theft of the highest proportion. Now you talk about our obsolete infrastructure. I remember back then when we had peak production between 2.2 to 2.5 million barrels per day. Now we're doing 1.6. You would think that with technological innovation that was supposed to have ramped up production, going from 2.2, 2.5 to about 3 million per day or 4 million barrels per day. But instead, we are retrogressing. Meanwhile, other countries have seen growth in production. Look at the shale oil in the shale gas in the United States, where they invested, private investors or private participants invested in developing how to be able to extract oil from shale. And that boosted the domestic production in the United States, where you have shale plays, not just in West Texas, but also in the Appalachian and in the Williston Basin in North Dakota, and it just exploded. But Nigeria, we're still stuck in primitive practices, and not just having primitive practices, but also losing our production to criminals in the leadership that are stealing and shipping all these assets and putting the money in their private pockets. Now we have institutions with the host community that are not even benefiting from these resources. We've had issues where in host communities, they don't have the basic infrastructure, don't have electricity, don't have their waters are being polluted. The fishermen can't even fish, but yet they are the people that are providing the subsurface resources that are powering the economy. And we're not even talking about the gas flaring. We've been flaring this gas for so long that we suppose other countries are monetizing gas flaring. We see countries where you are powering the industries because there's no way you can have industrialization or huge manufacturing without being able to power them using gas-powered heavy-duty machines. You can't run factories, you can't run manufacturing using conventional electricity. But we have neglected this opportunity. If you Google and look at the United States, you see a situation whereby their pipeline network spread across all across the country, from Texas all the way to New York, and from Texas across all the country. All the industrial hubs of the United States are being saturated with pipeline network. Tell me, in Nigeria, which pipeline network leads you from the wellhead all the way to centers where you need industrialization? None. We are not even allowing private individuals or private players to be able to come in and invest in this sector. And then you're not talking about a situation where you're having poor transparent systems in place, where if anybody wants to go and invest, you have a situation where you have all these fees, all these hidden costs, all these associated costs that are not official. And then you now see yourself, carrying costs that are not part of your cash flow projection. When you make an investment as an investor, you set up your investment, you're expecting future cash flows that are predictable cash flows. Now, when you come in a place like Nigeria and you're making investments, you find yourself incurring so much cost that that has not been, that there is no transparency. And then that impacts your future cash flows because you're looking at carrying several expenses that are not part of your cash flow projection. So at the end of the day, we have a situation whereby my friend here mentioned the PIA bill, the PIA Act of 2021. Now, the PIA Act is supposed to be one of the first steps towards getting to where we're supposed to be in the oil and gas, but they failed in actually creating a dynamic mechanism where you can have a collection of industry experts being able to run that NNPC Limited. Because in NNPC Limited, guess what? The PIA Act allows only Federal Ministry of Petroleum and Ministry of Finance to be owners of the NNPC. Now, what do you know about government or the ministry running infrastructures? They don't do a good job. So you see a situation where you're back to the old problems. You're back to government and the ruling class being able to create so much, lack of transparency that the total and collective wealth of the country is being siphoned into private pockets. So we have a lot of work to do, but we do not have the will of our leaders to be able to do the right thing when it comes to the oil and gas sector. And this is going to be a painful experience that we're going to have to deal with for quite some time before we get it right at the end of the day.
Let's go on to Comrade Digbini Odafe. Comrade Odafe, I'm going to ask you that same question. I need you to speak to the issues of infrastructure and technological advances in the sector, which Mr. Nwankwo says has been a major drawback to progress in the sector?
Well, let me answer that straight because I'm an engineer. There's nothing, we are not deficient of that. You know, technology is global.
Please go ahead, comrade.
Okay. So technology is not a problem to us at all. I worked offshore. In the world today, in a globalized village, anybody can buy any technology anywhere and deploy to anywhere he or she is interested in searching for oil. So we have latest technologies deployed in Nigeria. That one is not an issue at all. At least I can tell that from my experience working onshore, offshore, and swamp. Having said that, please let me, just like lawyers will say, if we appear before a court, what is most critical is whether that court has the jurisdiction to hear that matter. Once an issue has been raised concerning jurisdiction, then that court must resolve that before moving forward. Otherwise, no matter the judgment delivered later, it will be a waste of time. Now, what is the main issue in the petroleum sector of Nigeria? I have said it before. In the 60s, we attempted to be in control of our oil resource. And indeed, to a large extent, we were in control. That was why we had the NNPC. We had the indigenization policy in the oil sector. In fact, those days, you cannot hire just anybody from outside when Nigerians are competent. Then once Nigerian workers in the oil industries, you can't also terminate their employment except to follow due processes. But what has happened? As we kept on moving, thinking we're advancing, we're actually retrogressing. Let me repeat myself. And I said it in an interview I granted in 1999. We don't know the actual amount of crude oil we produce in this country. With due respect, I don't like being, I see it as an insult on our collective intelligence for people to say, oh, Nigeria is producing 5 million barrels or 2 million barrels, or it is 1 point something, we are now improving. Hello, for how long shall we going to deceive us? We don't know. Quote me. I was in the heart of Total Energy. I was the one computing the final official report of that company for years. We don't know. I challenge anybody to this moment. Thankfully, the current chairman of NNPCL was my colleague in NNPC, Engineer Musa Kida. The MD of NNPCL was also of Shell. Let them come out and prove me wrong. We don't know. I would tell Nigerians that we produce far more than is being reported. And that has been a problem that we are unable, or those in charge are refusing. And what has happened? Gradually, what used to be a very powerful inspectorate department that act like police of the oil industry, we later had its name changed to Department of Petroleum Resources to monitor the activities of the oil industries, whether private or those in joint venture with NNPC. We now have an NUPRC. What has happened to the NUPRC with the PIA? Dead. The NUPRC does not even know what is happening. All they're interested in is just be selling. They are busy offering a bid for rich offshore blocks to people who are interested. They don't know. They don't monitor. Quote me. It hurts me. I am from the Niger Delta. I am from Delta State. My community is an oil-producing community. We have led this struggle over the years. Why are we doing this to ourselves? Why? Then we worsen it now, came in with a PIA and transferred the ownership of our collective wealth to a few persons. Will President Tinubu find that patriotic courage that made me vote for him and campaign for him and advise him to be Minister of Petroleum Resources? Will he have that courage to invite Mele Kyari and his team back to come and account for what happened? And I'm very, very sure if that happens, Nigerians will be shocked. It has never happened in the history of this country. Do you remember, Uncle Imoni, that during that period, we were told that Nigeria is owing NNPCL? Can you imagine? We, Nigeria, as a federation, we are owing NNPCL. How? Our own property. I became a debtor to my own property. Today, they will tell us that we are owing them 2.something trillion naira. Tomorrow, they say, oh, they made a profit of 1.something next month. So it's just back and front. What I expected President Bola Ahmed Tinubu haven't made those powerful, decision and pronouncement on May 29, 2023, which is what I keep commenting for, because that's why I voted.
Let's go on a very short break, and when we return, we will reconnect with Comrade Igbini Odafe Emmanuel. Stay with us.
Issues are critical, germane to Nigeria's democratic process.
Politicians can only be seen maybe on television by judges. They should not intermingle, because once you intermingle, then you destroy the systems.
When the personalities are big, important to national discourse.
When you reach certain stage in power and you demonstrate arrogance to the extreme, there's no other thing that will happen to you other than to fall.
When the developments are seemingly complex, confounding like a 1,000-piece jigsaw, that's when we require bold, sound, and analytical minds to help put the pieces together. Jigsaw with Benga Arileba, now showing Tuesdays and Thursdays at 1 p.m. on AIT. Jigsaw, demystifying the issues.
Thank you so much for staying with us. I'll be going over now to Mr. Chinedu Kadike of IPMA. But before I do that, let me quickly bring in Mr. Nwankwo to answer a question that I asked earlier on, Mr. Nwankwo. Why is Nigeria stuck with export of crude and not making any effort, as it were, or so much effort, as it were, to at least convert some of its crude to finished products and export those finished products? We are seeing other countries, oil-producing countries, do just that, not limited to export of crude, but going on to have value added and exporting finished products.
So thank you for answering that question. It's general knowledge that when you export, when you sell raw materials as an entity, as an organization, that you don't have any strategy for growth. We know that you make money from actually adding value to raw materials to get into that finished product. Because when you sell your raw materials or when you sell your raw assets, what you're actually doing is you're passing that value, you're passing that profit to an entity, to a second handler that will actually layer and put a value to that raw materials to create finished product, which they can now sell for 2-3 times the amount of money that you would have received. And I see no reason why we have failed. We have the upstream, we have the midstream, and we have downstream. These various segments of the oil and gas value chain have been completely mismanaged. Whether it's the upstream sector where you have to go and explore and produce the oil and gas, or the midstream where you have to ensure that you have distribution channels, putting it up to the downstream sector where you have the refineries and the petrochemicals. All these segments have been poorly mismanaged. When you create for a country that actually depends, which our oil production happens to be one of our mainstay in our economy, we have not invested on building the proper infrastructures to actually create that finished product. If we had invested, this refinery that you have, Dangote, what are the procedures actually having a refinery? What are the procedures? You find out that the institution, our leaders have created such high barrier of entry, making it almost impossible for players or people that they can conglomerate or that will be able to synergize their resources to invest in this downstream, midstream and downstream. They've completely cut them off and created a system where you can't even you can't even come in and actually play a role. And I was talking about the situation with the states actually managing those regulatory authorities. In Texas, you have what they call the Railroad Commission, Texas Railroad Commission, that manages the regulatory, the permits, and everything that has to do with oil and gas. In Louisiana, you have the MMS. But in Nigeria, we have positioned that regulatory powers in the federal parastatals, which automatically creates a cloud and a cloud of uncertainty when people are looking to engage or trying to participate in that segment. What happens if we had, let's say, River State, Akwa Ibom, Abia State, manage the permitting and the licensing of participants that are coming to their states to actually set up the infrastructure? That would have been much, much better. You create competition, you democratize the process. Look at what's happening with Geometric. Geometric came in and created a value chain that was allowing them to actually get the feedstock for the electricity infrastructure from the gas production in Abia State. And Governor is doing an excellent job trying to ensure that he builds a template that the rest of the country can actually emulate. Do you know that if we have permitting structure, allowing the states to manage those permitting authority, do you know that it would have created not just competition across all these oil producing states, but also allowing participants, allowing investors to actually bring in lots and lots of opportunities into those states? But now you're having a federal government that has this opaque licensing process that makes it almost impossible and almost difficult for any participants to actually go in there and invest. I have one of my friends that wanted to invest, but he has to take permission from our criminal list in Abuja. And they started, turning him around, asking him to bring this, asking him to bring that, making it impossible. This guy was actually frustrated, and he had to leave with his investment and rescinded the investment he's supposed to make. So we have to actually call our leaders and hold them responsible and push that this PIA, yes, is a step in the right direction, but it has a lot of work that they need to do. Now, just to round up, my colleague that spoke that spoke recently, talked about the technology in this value chain. We know that the simple movement of crude oil or gas from one point to the other through a pipeline, you need metering machines that tells you that X amount of cubic feet or X amount of liters is living at point A, and you make sure that X amount of liters or cubic feet is actually going to arrive at point B. But when you see a situation where they don't have an accountability process that actually guarantees that when you have the crude oil living from one point to another point, that X amount of crude that left point A would expect to be at point B. But they don't have, nobody is able to account for the crude oil that they receive at point B. And that is the main problem. That is the technology that I was talking about. That is the technology that our leaders have failed to put in place, because we know that in civilized countries, even like in the US, you have a situation where the metering is so automatic, you don't have to be on site to be able to meter those transmission of crude oil or gas, because you have remote sensing that's able to tell you way out, when you're in the office, tell you, okay, at this point, we're having this amount of crude oil moving from point A to point B. And automatic billing, payment processing is already activated once those volumes have been confirmed. So
is it deliberate? Are we doing it deliberately because of the opacity of the industry?
Absolutely. That is the technology I'm talking about, because when you create opacity, you discourage investors from actually participating in this industry, and then the criminals will dominate and frustrate investors, and you can't have any growth. How can you justify going from 2.2 to 2.5 million barrels per day to now we can't even get up to 2 million barrels per day? Are you retrogressing with technology that is out there in the oil and gas? Look, I agree. There is a huge amount of technology in the oil and gas sector, whether it's in the drilling, whether it's in completion, whether it's in production. I work in the oil and gas in Nigeria, and I know I worked with great technology that was used for drilling. But green technology is useless when you don't have proper controls in managing the production, in managing the assets. That is the technology I'm talking about. So that you take away human intervention and allow the system to be automated and transparency to be the mainstay of that particular segment. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Ukadike, let's bring you in now. So much has been said in recent times about the business models in the industry, in the oil and gas industry. Many suggest that what obtains right now is actually old-fashioned, old model, and that there is a need to a transition to better models, more friendly models of doing business in the sector. Does Ipman buy into that concept?
Yes, absolutely. We do, absolutely. Because if you look at trade-off to coming on to independent market, the kind of things, the technology in the filling stations that are being used, and the current technology in the filling stations we are using now, you know actually well that the farm has modernized their filling stations and even doing more than expected hours. Most of our stations now are doing 24 hours. We are security provided because we are profit oriented. Our business model. We also want to recoup, the return of our investment. And if you look at what you just stated here, there are a lot of snacks in the market because those snacks are very, 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 very essential that I discussed it now. The issue of the refinery, which was what we are also following this mono supply of petroleum products from NNPC, while the NNPC is not yet unbonded. When the PIA came in, they were all unbonded. We now have the NNPCF, we have the petroleum equalization, scrap. We also now say that marketers can be able to fix in their prices. And all of these are the new, adverse to the sales of petroleum products in Nigeria. So the independent marketers are also still finding it very, very difficult to be able to adapt to the changes of the PIA. Because we will believe also actually the PIA is good, but it was not yet right. Because we still have one mono source of supply of petroleum products. The NNPCRA or NNPC, they have been importing petroleum products, but refineries are not. And since we export crude oil, we import petroleum. It's only when the NNPCR or PPMC will import petroleum products that the petroleum marketers can. So if the PIA has been enacted, it's supposed to give us multiple. What I want is the government supposed to be ready to give us multiple supply chain. We are the independent marketers in line with the PIA can be able to choose where the price is cheaper and buy from that particular place. So we're able to ensure the competition, the competition trend, even if the PIA, supposed to bring. But now the refineries are not working. Now it's only Dangote that is working now. We are also forced to still take that mono source of petroleum product from that. The issue of pricing is another big problem. The issue of transportation is another very big problem. The pipelines are down. These are the things that were supposed to be put in place before the PIO comes in, and it will also make life easier for them and less risk. Because we are listing a lot. Most of our trucks are driving 500 for 7 kilometers to be able to get petroleum products. It will take days. The roads are also bad. The money, our money is also being tied down. And while this truck is coming back, with a good price reduction, the independent marketers within this have lost millions of naira just because there is no stability in price. They also does us because there is no system that is working. There's no really system that is working because all the things we are talking about here about distribution of petroleum products, it lies on the head of independent marketers. The issue of financing is another very big problem. We have been clamoring for an independent oil and gas bank, or what we call an energy bank. Whereby the independent market can basically show you whatever they want to buy, and the bank will make sure that this product goes to our application. And we can sell at a very generous. I want to tell you that the PIA has given us opportunity to fix our prices at the application. But as I'm talking to you, we want us to fix the price because those who are also returning this product are also refining it and also importing it. So we are not let loose at the mercy of those who are bringing it together. Whatever the market is what we will be able to sell. So the competition is not really actually one of the two. The PIA is not really actually one of the two. Although in terms of satisfaction, and all the rest of them. And NDPR. That one is that we have improved because most of our situation in NDPR are technological driven. So the issue of going to the offices and all the rest of them has also been covered. But in terms of taxation, we are also suffering a lot of government taxes, 2, 3, 4, 5 taxes from the central government, from the state government, from the federal government. The independent marketers are still paying the same time. Affluent inflation charges, local government will take, the state government will take, the federal government will take, and all these things are boiled down on these little media resources or gain we are making. And the problem and the worrisome aspect of it is that the public doesn't see the refiners. They doesn't see the middlemen. What they see is these independent marketers that can be able to interact with them in their service sector. They hold for them nice enough, the information are enough, and if the product is bad, when NNPC use the product, sometimes they import product that has a little higher of ethanol. It is also in the communications that we receive the phone, police will come and arrest our product in that and not the rest of it. So I think there must be a holistic of institutionalization about the distribution of petroleum products in the oil and gas. So we could
Okay. All right, thank you so much, Mr. Chinedu Kadike. As we round off our discussion, let's bring in Comrade Igbini. Comrade Igbini, very pointedly, let me ask you this question. Why are our refineries not working? Why have they failed to work in spite of the humongous resources that have been pumped into bringing those refineries up to date?
The same thing why our upstream sector of this petroleum resource, industry has also collapsed. Unpatriotic corruption, massive looting, primitive looting. Uncle Imoni, let me put it on record. And to correct the wrong impression being made that production in Nigeria has been declining, it is not true. In fact, before now, with the coming of private companies, Nigerian companies all over the place, Indians, and so we are producing far more than we are producing in this country. What is happening is massive crude oil theft by the same companies. Massive crude oil theft. Quote me.
Under declaration of how much is produced?
Well, you are trying to use nice language to say under declaration. What is the difference between under declaration and somebody who is stealing? If you go to court now, what are you going to say? You know the actual figure you under declared. The court will only say that you acted, not you, that the person acted willfully in a criminal act. The real crude oil theft is going on in the IOCs. I said it even before year 2000, and I was queried. I answered. They said, no, you exposed us. Massive crude oil theft is going on in the IOCs. Then the ones who are not Nigerians that have joined now, in fact, it is even worse. And that is why it appears difficult for the NUPRC to even go and investigate them. Who are you to go and question certain persons you know are very powerful? They don't have meters. In every station, you ought to have meters that are proved. The integrity of that meter is supposed to be checked quarterly or maybe every month by the NDPR and the company. Do they have meters, let alone, checking their integrity to be sure that they are metering the correct thing? Go offshore and you will weep for this country. Why do you think most of these IOCs now decide to move offshore and giving us the excuse that in the Niger Delta our people are restive? What an insult. Restive how? You have been making money since 1956 in the same onshore of the Niger Delta. It is only recently now realized that we are restive. Meanwhile, most of the foreign expatriate staff married our sisters here because of the way we are so hospitable. So it is because when you go offshore, you say, no man, nobody's in control. So whatever they like, he declared to Nigerians, and then we now worsen matter with this PIA and gave the remaining to a certain few persons in the name of NNPCL. And then they tell us that the country is owing them. Then the president of Nigeria will now be forced to go and borrow more money from outside. When we have more than enough to even lend to other countries, we can't continue like this. And Mr. President, this is calling on you again. I advised President Tinubu and then former President Buhari to be Minister of Petroleum Resources substantive, for the simple reason that only the President and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces can deal ruthlessly with these unpatriotic, wicked looters of our country's resources. No other person. You can't appoint me Minister of Petroleum Resources and expect me to go and face them. I can't face them. They are deadly. It's only a commander-in-chief who has that authority to deploy the maximum force against them can do it. But unfortunately, what are we seeing?
All right, Comrade Igbini, thank you so much. Our time is up, but let's just bring in Mr. Nwankwo very quickly. Mr. Nwankwo, in 60 seconds, what do you think the Nigerian oil and gas industry will look like in another 20, 25 years? What are your expectations?
With the current crop of leadership that we have, we cannot make any progress. We're going to see retrogressive. As a matter of fact, we need a vision, path forward to be able to diversify into non-fossil fuel sectors. Because right now, the oil and gas, as we speak, is now becoming a portfolio that investors don't want to put money into because of climate change and all that. But our leaders have failed to diversify into non-oil exports, into non-oil economy. Because of this, you're going to see a situation whereby the whole world in 20 years, in 30 years, where they have moved away from having gas-powered vehicles, gas-powered systems, to now going into clean energy. And we are going to be stuck in the primitive, still using fossil fuel. But we have to, if we have to monetize this fossil fuel asset that we have within the next 5 to 10 years to be able to monetize. If we don't do that, within the next 5 to 10 years, when all the civilized society will have declared that they will not be having business transacting with any entity that is linked with fossil fuel, we're going to be left isolated and with the worthless resources that we don't know what to do with. So we have to begin to innovate and begin to monetize right now in preparation to transitioning into clean energy. Because if we don't do that, we're going to be left in dark ages.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nwankwo. Thank you so much. Comrade Igbini Odafe, I see you shaking your head. You have just 30 seconds to tell us what you disagree with there.
You see, this idea of renewable energy, the Western countries are using it to deceive us. Crude oil has come to stay. It has come to stay. Let nobody deceive Nigeria. Please, North America will move away from crude oil. No country, you can see the war between Russia and Ukraine is because of the crude oil that they are surviving or losing. Please, that renewable this thing is just to deceive us. This CNG is all done. Please.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Comrade Igbini Odafe Emmanuel is a petroleum engineer and a trade unionist in the oil and gas sector for several years. Thank you so much for your time. We also had joining us Mr. Chinedu Kadike, who is the publicity secretary of the Independent Petroleum Marketers Association of Nigeria, IPMAN. Thank you for your time and for your contributions. And of course, Mr. Godswill Nwankwo, who joined us all the way from Houston, Texas, in the United States, is a seasoned oil and gas advisor with over 2 decades of positive or progressive leadership and operational experience spanning the oil and gas, finance, and technology sectors. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time. All right, that's our program for today. Join us again when we bring you another edition of People, Politics, and Power. Bye for now.